thanks to each of you for really giving us a very condensed introduction to a lot of deep and extensive work that's going around. We'll ask a couple questions here, and then, of course, do as we've done before, invite you to ask your questions too. I think we talked about this being a future-oriented look, in other words, and so as you're thinking, and maybe I'll start even with you, Michael, too, as you're thinking ahead, maybe if we came back in 2 to 5 years or something like that, what are some of the in our changing ecosystem here, what are some of the key challenges or opportunities that you're thinking about now?
Well, there are a lot of great initiatives because people are concerned about the set of problems we've described. One of my worries is that we don't have a good concept for how we're going to evaluate these initiatives. Just take media literacy, for example. I'm not sure there is an accepted sound analytical framework for evaluating the effectiveness of a media literacy program. What are you measuring and when? And I think it's not even yet clear whether or not it's a skill or a set of skills that should be taught by themselves as a module or a course, or whether it should be blended in a. Those things are knowable, but not yet known. And we need leadership, both on the side of the research establishment, but also those that fund research, to commit to developing that type of sort of analytical basis, starting with the conceptual framework, so that when we're ready to scale up as a society, which I hope we will soon, we're backing the programs that work and the programs that are cost effective as well.
Great. Let's just take that same question around, okay?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think at a big level, we're at this point where, the volume of information has grown exponentially. Our ability to process it hasn't kept pace. There's this huge delta out there. Everybody's struggling with how to deal with that. And that's sort of a moment we're at, unlike previous moments in human history, where that gap has grown and hopefully, knock on wood, in the past, we figure out ways to get around it. That's sort of the big picture side of it as I see it. And again, reason maybe for some hope down the line that we will invent those tools and do the kind of research that can help solve those problems. I think the exciting thing for someone who does work like mine in social science and public opinion research is the opportunities to really do deeper data analytics that can really connect people's thoughts to their behaviors that were really impossible or inconceivably expensive in previous cycles is right out there for the taking right now. And some of that is cross-collaborative work with people from different fields, just like in the hard sciences. The same things hold in the social sciences. But really, some of it is just the opportunities to take data from Google, to take data from surveys, to take data from other sources, to use machine learning and other tools to really fill gaps that were impossible, human coding mountains in the past. I really think that the toolkit we've got for addressing this is sort of starting to expand in ways that might give us a chance to catch up.
I hope so. Okay.
Yeah.
Vanessa.
Yeah, I agree with Michael in terms of the evaluation aspect. I feel like we need to find ways to encourage, maybe even incentivize, and to facilitate the evaluation of things that are going on right now. And if things is going to be funded, that should definitely have an evaluation component. I think it was Brendan who kind of mentioned yesterday that let's start with things that are already out there and see if we can evaluate those rather than starting new. And that's sort of why the interdisciplinary approach is so useful, right? Because we have this balance of wanting to be rigorous and wanting to be efficient. And when you pull from different fields, you help to fill those gaps because it's such a diverse problem that crosses different disciplines. And so you can't expect one person to know everything that's going on in every field, but you want them to know so that they don't have those blind spots. So, finding ways that we can facilitate collaboration, because it's not very easy necessarily, and the evaluation component. So, yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So, so many things. And I think my biggest question in thinking is like, how can Google help in this space? And I think there's a lot of verticals that are in a lot of ways very difficult, very tricky. But I think health and science is indeed one of those verticals. Like a lot of people have agreement on. And you do have some controversy in health and science, but in general, there's a lot of consensus, scientific consensus, medical consensus. So I think this is, to me, this is the perfect vertical for us to do something together. That's number one. And number two is in a way, I like Google is a digital presence, and we know a lot of your digital life. When it comes to health and science, like your digital life doesn't necessarily mean what you do offline. You may be consuming misinformation as long as you still go vaccinate your kids, and it's okay, right? And the thing is like, how do we connect the digital life to the offline behavior? Therefore, all the communication strategies you employ, all the different things that you do on the platforms can actually be translated to offline metric that can lead to the effectiveness of things. So I don't have the answer, and I'm actually here just to ask a questions.
Well, actually, we had some discussion about formulating the questions as being a really key and really, I mean, you know this a lot in terms of the kinds of things that we study and do. How do you think in terms of, let's also talk a little bit about who we need to reach, and we've had a lot of discussion too about audiences and different changing demographics and so forth, and maybe starting again, I'll come the other way. Talk about a little bit about what your framework is for thinking about who benefits from your research and who you're reaching.
Right. The audience, reaching audience is actually a really interesting problem, because when we started the fact-checking project, the audience question is what motivated us to do it. Because when we talk to Bill and PolitiFact and all these fact checkers, they say, oh, there's lots of people visiting us, but all these people, like, they know fact. They know to visit PolitiFact, they are okay, right? You don't need to convince them. And the reason fact checkers liked to work with Google is we are able to reach a much broader audience, and the audience that is very different from the traditional audience of the fact-checking site. So that got us, in terms of health, that got us into this thinking like, hey, so there are people who are really literate, like very good scientific literacy and medical literacy. So those are the people are okay. There are people who are in a way that is amenable to the message, and so you want to reach those people. But there are also people who just don't want to listen at all. And in a lot of the cases, you sort of leave the third group alone because you don't feel you can do anything about it. But in something like a vaccine, you really need to reach a critical mass for the entire community to be safe, right? So you need to, I think for measles, you need to reach like 85% or 89% immunity ratio in order for everybody to be okay. And that means if that third group is big enough, you really cannot leave them alone, right? So that to me is very, like in politics, it's probably even worse, but at least in health, I think we have organizations like national academies and NIH, all these organizations where you do have the, in terms of the reputation, both among the scientific medical community, as well as among the general public, they actually know, right? So I think there's hope that those people, the third group of people, can still be reached and convinced. So.
That's great. Vanessa?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's for each topic, you're going to have a very different audience. And then in terms of prioritizing, exactly what you said, like, do you just leave that third audience alone because they're so stuck in their ways, or are they the most critical audience to reach? I think whoever that audience is, we need to meet them where they are, both cognitively and actually physically, like in the communities. So it's sort of balancing that, incorporating and actually valuing segmentation research. You need to work that into the timeline and the budget, and that's going to be the important formative work that will impact the rest of the campaign. But in terms of setting priorities, like who is most at risk, that's something I grapple with, and I think it's always going to be a big question on the table. If you think of something like direct-to-consumer ads that right now that are going out to the general population, that's just like, are we just starting to confuse people, like with the cancer drugs that are coming out, when they're hearing about things they've never heard about before? So that's like this sort of this broad, it's not a pressing problem necessarily. Maybe the more pressing audience there are the people that have cancer and they're trying to make a decision. But it's still really important to be aware of the general audience that's hearing the misinformation on a daily basis. So again, we need like the mix of the really focused, targeted campaigns, and then just sort of these broad scope campaigns that are just keeping an eye on sort of the information landscape.
Great. And part of, I think, even what the Misinformation Solutions Forum was thinking about having different kinds of diversity too, of people connected to different audiences, including everything from age to geographical and many different kinds of identity too. Yes.
Right. So they're at the table, and we're not making assumptions about what they want. We have them there so they can contribute
Exactly.
and be active, participants.
How do you think about this?
Yeah, you know, Pew Research Center is a funny place in that regard. I mean, we are not in the solutions business. It's almost part of our sort of fact tank moniker. We're not a think tank. We don't go out there and try to design the solutions to problems. And in part, that's just to maintain that credibility that we want to have with the public, who is used to, you know, one metaphor we use a lot as part of our goal is to help hold up a mirror to society so people can see themselves in context. And what I think most people are used to, and part of their skepticism is most of the people offering the mirrors, those mirrors distort things in different ways because they're trying to motivate people to do something good or bad or commercial or whatever. So if we can just maintain that, provide that mirror to people, we feel like that's a value service, valuable in and of itself. So our sort of, you know, theory of change, so to speak, is can we empower the people who are driving solutions with the data that we provide? So, you know, we're not going to try to solve the problems. We don't think of our sort of kind of evaluations are not around did we move the needle on an outcome. It's more did we inform a public and did we empower people who are in the civic space trying to do good in the world with useful information.
And how hard is it to maintain that trusted source space of being hopefully nonpartisan?
It's pretty hard. I mean, you know, I will admit that I'm fortunate to have inherited an organization that worked long and hard to build it, you know, and so then what we worry about is not fracturing that, you know, because trust is something that's built and earned a lot over time. It's why things like the story I told you matter to us, because it wasn't even our behavior that necessarily caused a crisis of confidence, but it was one that was a crisis to us. It was a crisis to our legitimacy in the eyes of people. So that was a communication effort that we had to actively lean into, even though we felt like it wasn't really our problem, so to speak. So, you know, those are ways that we try to just help the public engage with the challenges of information and then help people in the solutions business with better information.
Indeed, great, thank you. And Michael?
Well, ordinarily, I think the question of what to target, what to prioritize, where to start, those are the right questions to ask. But I think we're facing something that is so pervasive, so systemic, that I would say start anywhere, because what our research shows is what we call truth decay. It's not limited to a region of the country. It's not limited to a political party. We show that. It's not limited certainly to a single politician. This is truly a systemic problem that's developed over 20 years. And I'd say start anywhere, because everybody is going to need some enhanced ability to tell fact from opinion, tell sound statistics from statistics designed to mislead. I can go on and on and on, but I think this is a really serious, it's an existential problem.
Can you build on that just to add to the urgency, if you will, on how we sit as a nation compared to, say, what's happening in Europe?
Well, it's a serious problem here. In fact, our original intention was the book was going to cover sort of the global phenomenon, but it was getting too long. So we're going to publish our European analysis separately later this year. But let me just give you one little statistic that I just think is emblematic of how serious this is. I live in Santa Monica, which is a city right adjacent to Los Angeles. Los Angeles is the second largest city in the United States. 5 years ago, when the city elected a new mayor, it was a very hotly contested race. The mayor was term limited, couldn't run again. So two very well-funded candidates, very articulate, They weren't ideologically distinct, but this should have been a race that generated tremendous interest, and the turnout rate was something around 20%, a little less than 20%, I believe. I was, sort of shocked. And it turns out that that turnout rate was notable, but not because it was low. In Dallas, Dallas is the 9th largest city in the United States. The last time the electorate of Dallas went to the polls to elect a mayor, the turnout rate was under 7%. And the exit polls showed that among voters 35 and under, it was less than 2%. So it is not a good sign when the most disaffected are the youth. And it's just one data point. There were some sort of event-specific explanations for that, but there's a lot of very, very, I think, worrisome indicators. So, one of our former chairman of the board at RAND is a person in Chicago, Newt Minow, who was chair of the Federal Communications Commission, and he was the first one to say this. This is an existential threat because the requirements of our kind of democracy for informed citizenry is unassailable. We need that. It's a sine qua non of a effective functioning democracy. And that's why I'm pleased there's so much interest now in this, everybody here and others, because I think it's the top priority. If we don't solve this, my view is every other problem, whether it be in the healthcare arena or national security or energy or environment, it's going to be impossible to solve if we're not able to solve it on the basis of rigorous evidence.
But in the Start Anywhere, which a lot of people here are starting and doing, can we organize ourselves better? Can we create partnerships?
No doubt, and I think that some of the things that you've
Right.
initiated about collaboration and information sharing, absolutely essential, will make faster progress. But normally, I think it's a great question. Where do you target and what do you prioritize? But and maybe I'll figure that out for myself. But right now, it seems such a daunting challenge to me that almost anywhere we start and make progress will be good.
And as we think about this too, and I'm going to open up for questions now too, but we think about this in terms of timing. Sometimes, Reed Allen, we fund biomedical scholars. They often choose a question that they're going to work on for a lifetime. We may also be looking at something with quite a long chronic
Yeah, this did not
aspect,
develop
yes.
overnight,
Yes.
and it's going to take a while to turn it back. And in fact, one of the reasons we're not, I was saying to somebody earlier, we're really not known for good titles with our research, the products. But one of the reasons I like the concept of decay is that it describes a process, and if we're going to reverse it, I think we have to understand how it got started and how it picked up speed and how it resisted efforts to stop and reverse it. And it's going to require a substantial analytical effort. And one of the reasons we published this research agenda was, we didn't feel it was proprietary. In a sense, we knew we couldn't do it ourselves. We're going to need the entire community to pitch in.
Indeed, wonderful, good. So I think there are a couple questions. We have? I see one right there.
So I'm quite concerned also about our political process, and the trust value in our politicians is very close to the bottom, as I'm sure Pew has measured. What are solutions to bringing up that trust level? As it is, I guess there's that old theory that I trust my own politician, but I don't trust all the others.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is true, and I think some of that is a function of the kind of hyperpartisanship that Michael was describing. Some of that is the perception that is sort of classic skepticism about government, and some of it is a perception of nobody even looking out for the public interest. The only thing I would mention in that is it's easy to overgeneralize. I think some of the expressed skepticism about government in Washington is sort of a generalization about a broader discomfort with the phenomenon we're talking about here today and the phenomenon of partisanship. But it is the case that many of the things government does are still seen with more credibility. I mean, somebody was talking about the CDC before. Yeah, 71%. You know, it's a good number. You know, hasn't really gone down. Even the IRS, other places, there's still a fair amount of credibility in government. And I think importantly, while the federal government in Washington and members of Congress have been falling, state and local governments haven't been. You know, public confidence in state and local, even despite fractious partisan battles, even despite the fact that it was state and local governments that actually had to mete out a lot of the pain following the 2008 crash, right? Because the federal government could just go into deficits. They still were more resilient in the public's eye. So to me, it's always worth unpacking, you know, the generalized, almost representative mistrust from some of the more specific elements before we assume all is lost.
Could I jump in here just with a comment on what Mike said? I think journalism is going to be key here. You know, sometimes I ask myself, why is it that in almost every other walk of life, the trends seem to be going in the other direction? At least the walks of life I'm familiar with, the military, healthcare industry, baseball. I'm a big baseball fan, baseball. They're all more data intensive, more analytically sophisticated. And I think the explanation is there's accountability there. You know, in engineering, if you don't start with the facts, you know, bridge is going to fall down and so on. We have to figure out a way to hold public officials accountable for making decisions without the best available evidence. In the past, in these other periods of time, you'll see in the book, journalism have often played a role, a long-form investigative journalism in helping hold public officials accountable. But that's going to also require, I think, some enhanced capability of the electorate, the readers, because the field of information is very, very different than it was in the earlier periods, to look for, recognize the value of, and then use the efforts to hold public officials accountable.
Well, thank you. I wonder, I was so interested, Kong, in your presentation, including the part about the partnership with the NIS. And you talked about facilitating high content information, you know, facilitating its presence, raising it up. On there. Have you got any thoughts for us, for the Academy, for all of us in whatever we are doing, as to how to make that happen? I feel like you know how to make it happen, but how about the rest of us?
I wish I know, like, this is one of the goals for year 2 is what is the best way to elevate and promote and quote unquote the high quality content that is trustworthy. There's sufficient technical challenges there as well, and I don't want to say like we have the solution for that, and because the triggering, so-called the triggering question is really difficult, because people may search for all kinds of misinformation seeking kind of queries that don't necessarily match to the content of the high quality articles that you're putting out there. And lemon cure cancer, and if you write an article about like the best way, the most reasonable way to treat cancer, you may not mention the word lemon, right? So how do you connect these two? And this, when people search for lemon cure cancer, is the time where you want to actually push the high quality content. So this is a technical problem, and I'm hopeful, like in the year 2, with more content being produced by the national academies, and internally at Google, we'll be looking at this problem, and hopefully we will have I wouldn't say 100% like good solution, like at least some way towards that good solution that we will have over there. Yeah, but it's a very good question.
I think we're actually in the red zone, Aditram, right? I know that, and it's really hard because, again, these are very complex questions to this. I just think we have, and I know you're eager to announce partnership awards and everything else, but I think the one last word, I think someone used the word tweet as they were going along here, but if you had one last thing that you either want us to remember or a piece of advice for someone starting out in their career, looking and trying to help in this field of research, what would you offer? Right?
You've stumped me. I'll give Mike the first word.
The tweet, wow.
It doesn't have to be just a fast because Dietram's
Yeah.
brings.
I'm sorry, no. You should have prepped us on this one. The other panel prepped for this.
The panel prep for this. I just thought, well, so I was going to
Okay.
start with Michael saying, just jump in and do it, right? I
Right.
mean,
Good.
you're kind of,
Yeah.
anyway, but we'll prep later.
Okay.
We'll hear it later. Vanessa?
Collaborate and innovate.
Yeah.
Great, fabulous.
I don't tweet.
It's a great way, there's more to discuss when we'll do later on. Here we go. To thank our panelists, thank you very, very much. Good. Sorry, I didn't mean
No, it's okay.
Well, thank you all for a fascinating discussion and also for a great transition, because Vanessa said that we shouldn't, or that we need to facilitate a lot of these collaborations rather than just pay lip service to it. And you heard at least about 2 collaborations in the past partnership awards. And we're very fortunate, and when I say we, I mean the Standing Committee on Science Communication, the science and practice of science communication, and many of the members are here and have spoken to you. But we're very fortunate to have the support from the Rita Allen Foundation to announce additional partnership awards moving forward, awards that are explicitly designed to create and maybe answer some of those questions that, we don't have really good, pithy, short summaries for just yet, but we're working toward. We made a short bit.ly link at the bottom, hopefully that will help you get to the website of the Standing Committee where all of these awards are outlined. I want to very quickly just tell you the idea for the 2 types of awards. Both of them are awards that are really meant to give teams of practitioners, scientists, social scientists among them, the opportunity to plan in the Catalyst Awards. So these are smaller awards at the very early stages to really fund things that typically are difficult to fund and get something, partnerships and projects underway. And then the second set of awards, larger awards, that are really designed toward a little bit the later stages, design, execution, but also then the evaluation. And we've heard a lot about methods, about measures, and about evaluation. So I'm not going to talk a lot more about these. All the information is on the website of the Standing Committees. You saw the deadline coming up. Again, I think these are hopefully high incentive and somewhat manageable effort awards that incentivize exactly the kinds of exciting partnerships across different sectors, across different ways of thinking and doing things that we've been talking about for the last two days. As we're moving forward, please make sure that you look at our website, kind of some of the initiatives that are coming up to stay in the loop. A lot of the group discussions hopefully will feed into that. Again, we put a shortened link up there, and that just leaves me with the best job of this whole conference, and that is thanking a whole bunch of people, the people who fed us outside and tirelessly, and the people who've helped us with tech support, Thomas and everybody else, the folks outside, the staff, Jennifer, all of the people working with her, and then I think this was the most high-end microphone runners that we've had, ranging from the division director of the Division of Behavioral and Social Sciences and Education to Holly Rhodes and Ann Merchant. I don't think we'll ever get a more overqualified team of mic runners ever again. So I wanted to thank them as well. And as I said 1,000 times here, without all the support that we've gotten for this and all of you participating very actively, this would not have been the meeting that we've had. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and safe travels.